Hello again. Welcome back to my reading table and welcome to the penultimate lesson in our journey through the tarot. I'm calling this one Choice-Centered Tarot Readings. And what I want to show you is that the tarot is all about choice and it's all about possibilities. It's not about fixed outcomes. And actually, what I hope you'll see from this particular technique of reading is that, to a great extent, we control the outcome. For me, if a tarot reading's done its job, it's empowered the person that I'm reading for. And that person will go away feeling that they have choices and that the range of possibilities that were open to them has become enriched and enlarged. So, you could be forgiven for thinking I've got a bit of a cluttered table here. I've already laid the reading out, I've pre-prepared it. This isn't as complicated as it looks, and actually what we have here is a variation of the Celtic cross spread that we've recently looked at. But what I have done here is all the cards are doubled up. So instead of one card per position, we actually have two cards. So I've employed 20 cards here. You'll also notice that I'm working with two separate decks. Now, if you have just one deck, it is possible to still employ this technique. I would advise using two, because there are times in the reading process where it's useful to actually employ the same card from two decks. So in this instance here, I already have two cards which I've doubled up on. I've got the Eight of Wands twice and I've got the Lovers twice. I'll explain this as we go through the process. What I've done, I've used two visually distinctive but very similar decks. I've used primarily the core of the reading. I've used this deck, which is the Radiant Rider-Waite Tarot. So in effect, it's a standard Rider-Waite based on the images of Pamela Coleman Smith. But you can see here, this one has been recoloured and repainted in a modern way. So that's the Radiant Rider-Waite as my primary deck. For my secondary deck, I've used a standard Rider-Waite deck. This one is the Smith-Waite Centennial deck, which is a facsimile of the original 1909 printing. So there we go. That's the box for the Smith-Waite Centennial. So as I say, what that's done is my two decks, I've got a very clear distinction between the two decks on the table, because obviously they are visually quite different. One is obviously an antique reproduction. The other one is in bright, bold and modern colours. So I can very clearly see the difference between the two decks. But what works for me here is that the symbolism is the same. So hopefully that will make more sense as we're going along. What I've done, the main reading, which was initially spread out as a single Celtic cross, is in effect the core of the reading. We've asked the tarot the question and we've turned over a random set of 10 cards, like we did with the previous Celtic cross. But that gives us a snapshot that is beyond our control. So the duplicate Celtic cross that I've laid over this, I've basically worked with these initial cards, but then rather than picking the second set of cards at random, I've picked them very deliberately, either to portray the perspective as I see it or the person that I'm reading for sees it, or to elaborate on the initial choice of cards, but to take control of where we want to go. So I hope that makes sense. I think it'll make better sense as we go through the reading card by card. So let's proceed. and I'll take you close into the reading table so I can guide you through this particular spread. So here we have our Celtic cross spread, our initial spread using the Radiant Rider-Waite Tarot, and as you can see, our duplicate spread alongside it using the Smith-Waite Centennial deck. Okay, let me just fill you in on the background behind this. This is, I'm using the scenario and the questions that were brought to me by a client I read for a few years ago. This is a bit of a difficult situation. This is about a couple that broke up, but where there remains unresolved emotional agendas and unresolved issues. Basically, this was a bit of an acrimonious breakup. Bridges were burnt, but now there's regrets on at least one side of that burnt bridge. So my client came to me. Obviously, this past relationship was on their mind. They potentially wanted to put things right or to revisit to put things right, but were uncertain as to whether that was the right way to proceed forward, both for themselves and obviously for the other party. So that's the background of the reading. So let's go through what we have, and we'll proceed through the initial cards and then what I call the cards of choice. Okay, so here we are. The two cards representing the present. So we've got the King of Swords for the present position, and it's crossed by the Ten of Cups. Now, talking with my client, we both concluded that this was very much about them. This is about where they were in the present when this reading was done. So the querent for whom I was reading was very much embodying the King of Swords with regards to the details of their relationship. They were reassessing the relationship and the closeness and the love that had been shared. But at this stage, they were coming at it from a position of increased maturity, and also, because we are dealing with the realm of swords, from a position of objectivity. And in effect, as the king, they were weighing up the pros and cons of what had gone before. Okay, so that's where we stood for the present. In terms of the best that could be achieved in that situation, we drew the Star reversed. So, as the card of wishes and hopes and aspirations, this was kind of showing a bit of a dead end. Discussing it with my reading client, they very much agreed that they felt that what they wished for and what they wanted was not going to happen, and maybe that their expectations and hopes for reconciliation were not coming from a realistic place. So that was the Star reversed. At the root of the reading, they drew the Magician reversed. So again, this shows a similar blockage. The Magician is the archetype of transformation. But on discussion, they felt that actually that was the problem. Neither party had really changed or budged, and that was what led to the stagnation in the relationship. So there we have it. There's a bit of an impasse. There's a lot of reassessment going on about a situation that had a lot of good emotional potential, but maybe the foundations were wrong, and also maybe the current expectations were unrealistic. Okay? So we've come thus far. Let's have a look at our duplicate cards. So the reason for laying these cards out alongside the ones we've drawn at random is to expand on the possibilities and the choices that have been shown in these original cards. So in effect, We let the tarot be in control when we drew these, but when we draw this second lot from the second deck, we're actively choosing them. We're not turning these over at random, upside down, even though I've got them, for practical reasons, I've turned them down so that we can turn them over one at a time. But these cards have been very deliberately chosen. And in this case, the person I was reading for knew what they were choosing, and we discussed their choices. So, we've got the King of Swords that was representing what was going on for them for the present. Now, the challenge I gave my client was the tarot has reflected the King of Swords back to you in this reading. And we've examined how you actually have been manifesting the King of Swords. So, as we said, they'd been reflecting from a mature place. Now, the question to my client is, if you had to pick a card, which one feels most resembles you at the moment? That's the one the tarot has said resembles you. Which one do you feel resembles you? So this is interesting because my client drew not a king, but a page. And the conclusions we drew from this was, although they acknowledged that actually there was very much an element of this king in where they were at the moment, how they actually felt was very different. They felt as if they were coming from an immature place, and that they weren't necessarily making as informed choices as they would like to. We also talked through what this Page of Swords represented, and I kind of put it to them that the page obviously represents a stage of emotional growth or immaturity, but whereas the king is coldly and compassionately objective, maybe this page is not as objective. Maybe, maybe some of the hurt feelings and resentments were still at play, and the lack of trust engendered in this page might have something to do with where they felt at the moment. And that was something that the client really did resonate with. They could resonate with the vulnerabilities going on here, while at the same time acknowledging that they, to a certain extent, were acting out of the place of the king. So already you can see this is the card that came out at random. But actually, by going through the court cards, leafing through a few court cards, looking at different ones, this was the one that the client consciously identified with. So that's already given us two very different perspectives. One that they wouldn't have chosen, but they could relate to, and one that they did actively choose. Okay? So having done that with that central card, we can proceed to do something similar with the other cards. Now, the crossing card, the 10 of Cups, we talked about how they'd examined the mature aspects of the relationship that they'd left behind, the deeply fulfilling aspects. But we also identified that maybe that was tying in very much with future aspirations. So what I actually challenged my client to do was to look through the cards and pick an alternative aspiration, particularly in the light of this page. What we selected was the 9 of Cups. Now, the reason we selected this one is that the king has been ruminating over the mature aspects of the previous relationship, the long-term aspect of it, the commitment, the depth of connection. Now, maybe that's not something to be recreated. Maybe tying in with the aspirations, maybe one of the most practical ways of actually getting this card back upright is to look for something a little less from someone different for the time being. So already we have choices. This is not the only scenario potentially feeding into the present. this is the one that the tarot gave us, but we're already saying, well, what if we chose something different? What if at this stage of the reading, I choose to change direction? And maybe if I get this king to start looking at that rather than this. Okay? So, let's look at the crowning cards. The best that can be achieved. The Star in reverse, as it stands at the moment. We chose, or my client chose, the Two of Cups in the upright. Now, this was very deliberate because it represents two things. It obviously represents a reconnection and a communication with their ex-partner. But what we did discuss in the light of this is the possibility that they remain open to moving into pastures new and maybe looking to make new connections with somebody different. You know, if this proves an unreachable wish, you know, if there is no reconciliation and if there is no resolution or healing of the damage that was done between them, you know, maybe it's not quite so important. Maybe the emphasis shouldn't just be on that one person. Okay, and actually, in opening up the possibilities here, it's actually gently coming to terms with the fact that sometimes you can't fix things. So, if the Star card remains in its negative aspect, maybe that can't be fixed. That's a possibility to face up to. Obviously, the other thing we did is that we turned this card upright and said, well, how would this look if it is possible to find some reconciliation? What would the shape of this be with your former partner? What are your expectations? Maybe just friendship and fun, or just friendship on its own, rather than trying to re-explore or recreate this dynamic. Okay? So, we still haven't looked at the root. We talked about this Magician in the reverse, this inability to grow, transform, which possibly applied to one or both parties. Now, the question at this stage that I asked the client is, ideally, what would you want that card to be? That obviously reflected an uncomfortable truth, and it was a card that the client could readily relate to, albeit reluctantly. So what they ended up choosing was not the Magician in reverse, but the High Priestess upright. And the discussion that came from this, and the reason that this card was eventually chosen, was because as we discussed this, the client actually began to explore and own some of their own inflexibility, not just seeing this Magician reversed in terms of their partner's lack of flexibility or inability to change or move forward. What this represented to the client was the ability to trust in the unknown and actually to go beyond their comfort zone. The High Priestess is the guardian of the unknown, in a way. So here is what the tarot highlighted. This card here, which was actively chosen, represents the client's, what the client would choose in terms of their level of openness to change and to growth, and the ability to be more flexible. And for them, the High Priestess upright represented the ability to journey forward that this didn't. Okay? So, moving on to the past position. This is a very interesting choice on their behalf. We originally pulled the Eight of Wands upright. They chose the Eight of Wands reverse as the mirror card. Now, that was an instant choice, and it was an intuitive one. And when I asked them why, they said that when they saw this, it highlighted the speed with which they ran away from each other, or certainly they ran away from their partner. Now, when I asked them why they'd picked the same card in reverse, they said it was actually because it was an intuitive thing. And they said that this pairing showed that they were running in one direction, their partner was running with equal speed in another. So that is actually a very intuitive choice. It wasn't about the literal reversal of this card. It was literally about the actual imagery itself. Now, this is a really valid way of using the tarot. There was no prompting here on the client's part. What mattered to them was the speed and the direction. We also talked about how this could have also been shown with certain, if you'd have put two court cards next to each other and one was facing one way and the other was facing in another direction. That's a very, very valid, intuitive way of interpreting the tarot. And for them, that summed up their breakup, or actually what resulted from their conflict. That's how the breakup looked to them. Very difficult, but also sometimes actually seeing the truth represented on such a simple level can do a huge amount to help you to understand what's been going on for yourself. Okay? So, in the near future, difficult card. We drew for them the Three of Swords, which obviously represents a certain amount of grief and heartache. So, we wanted to look for a card. The question for the client here was, how much do I need to be here? How much of this do I need to own? Do I need to stay here? And what they drew was this. This is what they chose to put next to it, the Six of Swords. So, there is a recognition here that actually, there is a lot of the time you can't escape this kind of grief. You have to journey through it. But that was what was most important to the client. On discussion, what came out was that if this was a process that they had to go through, which obviously they realised that, grieving the loss of this relationship, potentially having to grieve not being able to fix it or find any resolution a couple of years down the line, could potentially lead to this kind of pain and grief. But for it to matter and for it to make any sense and for it to be constructive, my client felt that they had to be actively journeying through it and to be able to come out the other side. So that's why they picked the Six of Swords. They didn't want to stay here. They wanted to be able to go through this constructively, but to leave the stormy waters here behind for the calm waters in the distance. So this actually prompted a discussion about grief and a discussion about letting go. So you can see already that by deliberately choosing cards to set alongside the ones that were chosen at random, you expand the possibilities, you expand the conversation, and you actually expand the exploration of the self. So, all of that, and we've only completed part one of the reading. Let's get personal. This has been circumstantial for my client. This is about them. Where they are now, who they are, where they're going. Okay, for them personally, the Five of Cups, which I think is fairly self-explanatory. The cups represented the broken relationship, the damage that was done, the pain that was caused, all of the good that was lost. Okay? But then we've also had to examine that, there are still upright cups. This is not a completed journey. You can see the road in the distance, the bridge going over the river. the castle. This is not the end of the story, okay? So if this is where the tarot is saying where they are at the moment, let's have a look what my client chose to put alongside this, okay? There we have it. This triggered an insecurity realization. They felt stuck. They felt frightened of going on. They couldn't see these in their life as it stood at the moment. They certainly couldn't see the possibilities that the future could bring. All they could see was what they perceived to be a mistake and a discord with somebody that they cared about that they weren't even sure could ever be put right. So I asked them how they felt, and we went through the cards, and this is what they chose. Now, they chose the Knight of Pentacles because they felt stuck. This is somebody who fights passionately for what they believe in, but as the Knight of the realm of Earth, he's the most static and solid of the knights. Now, I suppose in a way we should turn this upside down, because they picked it because they literally felt stuck and felt rooted in the earth. So what this pairing says is that there is the possibility of new and exciting things within this card, despite the loss and the pain. But actually, the very choice of this card shows that my client was here acknowledging that they really were having difficulty taking their eyes off these, accepting the loss and moving forward. So that brings up some really key questions about the wisdom of trying to patch things up. Okay, where's the motivation coming from? You know, is it a case that they really need to let go and just move forward? Or, you know, is it constructive to try and rekindle contact and sort things out? Is the desire to rekindle contact coming from a healthy place? They feel stuck. So that simple combination is going to inform how we read these remaining three. Okay, so this was my client. This is the environment that they're functioning in, as shown to us by the tarot. And we initially drew the Seven of Cups, the card of choices. So here they are, stuck by the river, 3 cups overturned, 2 still full, a journey to complete. They are in a place where they need to make choices, but they're feeling stuck. They're feeling unable to move forward. Let's have a look at what we chose between us in this case. There we are. This is where the tarot is showing them to be, and I said, let's have a look where ideally you need to be. If this is the environment you're in, this is the one that you need to take steps to create. And we went for the 8 of Cups in this instance. The reason being is this shows a choice that is yet to be made. We went for the 8. It's an incredibly sad card on so many levels, but in the end, on discussing several alternatives, this is the one that they plumbed for, because the decision has been made and there is some forward movement. It's also potentially a decision that represents sadness. So in choosing this card and in actually accepting this card as a possibility, my client is also accepting that they may have to walk away and that they may have to embrace this because the resolution that they were looking for may or may not come about. Okay, so this has shown us something very real about the situation. This has shown us something else. It's shown what happens when the client, the person you're reading for, begins to actively take control of the reading and choose whether or not they're going to go there, stay there, or be there. Okay? Hopes and fears. And ironically, we drew about the most powerful card possible here because the Lovers came up in reverse. So I think that speaks for itself. I mean, this reading was about a very important relationship that went wrong. So the Lovers in reverse actually speaks about that. I think the presence of the Lovers card obviously speaks of a lot of hopes. You know, this is a precious connection that they actually at least wanted to do something to salvage or to help, you know, to mend to a certain extent. The fact that it's reversed, yeah, that's the fear. You know, is this irredeemable? So we made a very simple choice here. All we did was we picked the Lovers in the upright. Because again, as with the Eight of Wands, we felt that both sides of this card reflected what they were thinking and feeling and what choices they needed to make. The fear that it's all turned upside down. The hope that it can be set up right again. Okay? So let's look at the final cards, at the resolution. My client drew the Strength card in reverse. So this is a difficult one. This is a difficult one to face because even at the end of the reading, it shows that they are personally in a compromised position. This is not showing somebody who is actually in control of the feelings and emotions going on here. It's showing somebody that's actually having difficulty containing the passions and their feelings and their grief. You know, upright, the lady is peacefully, quietly and gently closing the mouth of the roaring lion. Okay, so in reverse, that quiet inner resolve is shaken. Okay, so that's not ideally where my client wanted to be, but the insecurity that they expressed through choices like this in the early stages of the reading actually make that a very real possibility. This is not acknowledging weakness as a fault. This is acknowledging that actually this is a situation that I may be out of my depth with. I may not be able to deal with. I may not be able to cope with this grief. How do I come to terms with the fact that some situations just can't be put right? Okay? So the question that goes with the final chosen card is, where do I want to be at the end of this process? Now, the secondary question that goes with that is, if this is where I want to be, how do I set goals to get there? Okay, so this is what my client chose, and nothing could be further from this. They've chosen the world in the upright. Now, when we were making this choice, we talked through how my client felt about each of these cards. They felt sad and uncertain about this, but then they also realised through the process of this reading that their potential inability in the future to handle the feelings and emotions around this situation may well have come from a place of not facing up to the reality or not facing up to the truth, okay, or being frightened to face what was really inside themselves. In choosing the world, they chose the most triumphant and whole and completed card in the deck. And in effect, what my client was saying is, that's not who I want to be. I want to be her. You know, this is someone who's reached wholeness, reached fulfillment, reached completion. So the choice of this card is actually not as casual as it looks, because it's actually the choice of this card, in choosing this, they were recognizing that actually they may have to make some difficult and painful choices. They may actually have to allow themselves to walk away, feel the pain, and move through it bravely. So, for my client, this reverse card represented maybe a little bit of cowardice and a reluctance to face the possible pain of the situation. In rejecting that card and choosing this one, they were actually beginning to find in themselves the inner strength to make these choices that we've discussed previously. So, let's have a final look at what we've done here. In choosing the initial 10 cards, we gave ourselves a very valid snapshot of what was potentially going on in my reading client's life at that given moment. But in choosing the second 10 cards in a very different way, by deliberately taking them out of another deck, by choosing the cards upright and putting deliberately chosen cards in deliberate places on the reading, in effect what my client has done is taken ownership of the situation. They've looked at what the tarot has told them at random. They've evaluated it. They've accepted it as a possibility, but they've also accepted that they do not have to take that as the given direction that they're travelling in. This second set of cards is a very proactive taking ownership of the situation and planning the journey in the direction that they want it to go. So that is choice-centered tarot. And there we are, a double Celtic cross spread featuring 20 cards, 10 cards the tarot has chosen for us, and 10 cards that have been deliberately chosen by ourselves. I hope that was helpful. We've looked at a small range of techniques for reading the cards. We've looked at a limited range of card spreads, 2 card readings, 3 card readings, 4 card readings, the 10 card Celtic cross. There are so many other ways to read the cards. I think that's for another course. Hopefully I've given you some of the basic ones, and with this lesson on choice-centered readings, I hope I've given you a taste for some of the more creative and rich ways that we can use the cards. Do go and explore for yourselves. Discover some of the other card spreads that are out there. Every tarot book is filled with them. Make some of your own. That's one thing I do encourage you to do. Maybe take some of the techniques that I've shown you through this course, adapt them, begin to play with them, experiment with them. This was the penultimate lesson. Join me for the final lesson in this course. And in that final lesson, I'm going to be teaching you to use the cards as a meditation. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next time. If you've enjoyed this lesson and found it helpful, please hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to my channel to find out when I share new videos or go live. You can also find me on Instagram at Chris Butler Artist, on Twitter at Butler Tarot, and on Facebook at The Sacred Tarot. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.